On a winter afternoon in a small mountain town, a police officer stopped walking because something in the snow refused to let him pass. A tiny German shepherd puppy was tied to a frozen bench, her body shaking, her eyes wide and silent, as if asking the whole world one simple question. Does anyone still see me? What happened next would change 3 lives forever and remind a broken town what compassion truly means. Stay with this story because the ending will leave you believing in miracles again. And before we continue, tell me where you are watching from today. Leave your city or country in the comments so we can share this moment together. Winter arrived in Silver Hollow, Colorado, the way old stories say it does. Without warning, without apology, and with a silence that pressed against the bones. Snow fell in slow, drifting spirals from a sky the color of old steel, softening the roofs, the roads, the empty storefronts, the bus stop at the corner of Pine and Crawford, where the wind curled in small, restless circles. The town itself was no more than 8,000 souls stitched between mountains and memory, a place where everyone knew the sound of everyone else's grief, even when no one spoke it out loud. Ethan Cross, 41 years old, senior patrol officer of the Silver Hollow Police Department, moved through that snowfall like a man who had learned long ago how to walk inside storms. He stood a little over 6 feet, broad-shouldered, his dark hair kept short from old military habit, a thin scar cutting through his left eyebrow, a souvenir from Afghanistan that no one ever asked about. His face carried the permanent calm of someone who had seen enough chaos to no longer fear it, and the permanent tiredness of someone who had never quite come home from it. The divorce 3 years earlier had etched deeper lines beside his eyes, and the death of his K-9 partner Ranger the winter after that had hollowed out something in him he never spoke of. Among his colleagues, Ethan was known as steady, quiet, painfully honest. Among the townspeople, he was the man who never looked away when things went bad. That afternoon he was finishing his patrol, boots crunching over new snow, breath turning white in front of him, when something near the bus stop forced him to slow. It was not sound. It was the absence of it. No barking, no whining, only stillness where life should have been moving. Under the small rusted awning of the bus shelter, against the iron bench, sat a shape too small, too wrong, too motionless to belong there. A German shepherd puppy, no more than 3 months old, black and tan coat dulled by snowmelt and dirt, her ribs faintly visible beneath thin fur, her body wrapped loosely with strips of gray packing tape that bound her to the cold metal slats. The tape was not tight enough to cut, but tight enough to trap. Snow clung to her ears. One paw trembled where it pressed against the frozen bench. Her eyes, enormous and dark, lifted as Ethan approached. A scrap of paper fluttered above her head, taped to the shelter's post. In uneven handwriting it read, "Her name is Willow. She's gentle. She's not mine." Willow did not bark. She did not whimper. She simply watched him. There are moments, rare and terrible, when a man knows before he thinks. Ethan felt it then, the same cold certainty he had felt kneeling beside wounded soldiers, the same silence that came before he called medevac, the same quiet voice that once told him Ranger was dying in his arms. He stopped walking. Snow whispered around them. Cars passed on Crawford without slowing. The town kept breathing. Behind him, 2 people waited for the bus. Sarah Milton, early 30s, tall and thin, with dark curly hair pulled into a messy knot and a wool coat 2 sizes too big, clutched her phone with one hand and her purse with the other. She worked nights at the grocery store and carried exhaustion in the stoop of her shoulders. Life had made her careful, but not unkind. Beside her stood her son Noah, 6 years old, small for his age, freckled, with bright, observant eyes that refused to miss anything. He wore a blue knit cap and a jacket patched at the elbows, the quiet child of a woman who had learned too young how fast things could be taken away. Sarah noticed Ethan's slow. Noah noticed Willow. "Mom," Noah whispered, tugging her sleeve, "the dog's cold." Sarah followed his gaze. Her face tightened. She looked away. Not from cruelty, but from helplessness. The kind that grows in people who have had too many problems and too little room for new ones. Ethan did not look away. He did not touch the puppy yet. Training and law and years of bitter lessons rose inside him. He lifted his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 3. I have an abandoned animal, juvenile German shepherd, appears severely underweight and possibly hypothermic, restrained with tape at the bus stop on Pine and Crawford. requesting animal control and authorization for emergency intervention due to medical risk. The response crackled through the cold. Copy Unit 3, Animal Control en route. You are authorized to render immediate aid if life-threatening. Ethan lowered the radio and knelt slowly so he was level with Willow's eyes. He took off his gloves and extended 2 fingers toward her nose. She did not pull away. Her breath was shallow, barely visible in the air. Her ears twitched once. "Hey there," Ethan murmured. His voice was low, steady, the voice that had calmed wounded men and frightened dogs alike. "I'm here." Her eyes never left him. He shrugged out of his coat, heavy with snow, and draped it gently over her back before touching the tape. Up close, he could see how thin she was, how her hip bones pressed sharply under skin, how her fur was patchy in places where the tape had pulled. She smelled of metal and cold and the faint sourness of hunger. Behind him, Sarah shifted her bag higher on her shoulder. "Officer," she said quietly, "are you allowed to do that?" Ethan did not look back. "I am when a life's on the line." He peeled the first strip of tape. Willow flinched, but did not resist. The second strip came away, then the third. Each movement was slow, deliberate, as if he were unwrapping something sacred. Snow gathered in his hair, his hands shook only once. When the final strip loosened, Willow sagged forward into his arms, her body lighter than it should have been, lighter than anything alive had a right to be. Ethan felt her heart, fast and fragile, against his palm. Noah stepped closer. "She's breathing," he whispered. "Yes," Ethan said. "She is." He wrapped the coat tighter around her, cradling her against his chest. Willow's head slipped under his chin, her breath warm and faint against his neck. She did not struggle. She simply stayed. The sound of an approaching truck cut through the snow. Mark Sullivan, animal control officer, late 40s, thick beard frosted white at the edges, climbed out with a thermal blanket and medical kit. Mark had been raised on a ranch outside town, had buried more animals than most men had buried people, and carried that weight with quiet respect. "Hell of a thing," Mark said softly when he saw her. They worked together without speaking much, wrapping Willow in the blanket, checking gums, checking pulse. Mark shook his head. "She's in rough shape, but she's hanging on." Ethan looked down at her. "That's enough." The shelter truck pulled in behind them, lights flashing against the falling snow. The town seemed to pause. For just a breath, winter held its voice. Ethan carried Willow to the truck, his arms firm, his steps careful. Sarah watched, her face pale. Noah lifted his hand in a small wave toward the puppy. Willow's tail flicked once, barely. As the doors closed, Ethan climbed in beside her, snow melting on his boots, the sound of the engine rising around them. Outside, Silver Hollow disappeared into white. Winter kept falling. And for the first time that day, it did not feel like it was winning. The heater in the animal control truck rattled like an old heart as it fought the winter. Outside, Silver Hollow dissolved into falling white, storefronts blurring into ghostly shapes, the mountains at the edge of town fading behind curtains of snow. Inside the truck, time slowed to the rhythm of a fragile breath. Willow lay cradled against Ethan's chest, wrapped in the thermal blanket Mark had brought, Ethan's police coat layered over it for extra warmth. Her body was shockingly light, a living thing reduced to something that felt like it could drift away if he loosened his grip even slightly. He kept one gloved hand beneath her ribs, the other cupped gently over her back, feeling the faint, frantic drum of her heart. Mark Sullivan sat across from him, thick hands working steadily as he checked Willow's gums, her paws, her eyes. Mark's beard was already crusted with frost, his weathered face shaped by decades of wind, livestock, long nights, and losses that never made the news. "She's hypothermic," he said quietly. "Dehydrated, too. If we'd found her an hour later—" He didn't finish the sentence. Men like Mark rarely did. Ethan nodded. He didn't trust his voice yet. The radio on Ethan's shoulder crackled. "Unit 3, this is dispatch. Frosthaven Veterinary Emergency is prepped for intake. ETA 12 minutes. 12 minutes, Ethan repeated. His gaze never left Willow. Her eyes were half open now, unfocused, dark pools catching the flicker of streetlights as they passed. She shifted once, a faint tremor running through her small frame. Her breath brushed his collar, thin and uneven. "You're doing good," Ethan murmured. "You just stay with me." Across the narrow aisle, Sarah and Noah rode in silence. Mark had insisted they come along after Noah refused to leave the puppy behind at the bus stop. Sarah had hesitated, torn between caution and the simple gravity of her son's pleading eyes. Now she sat gripping the seatbelt, her long fingers white at the knuckles, her face pale beneath the wool scarf wrapped high around her neck. Sarah Milton had learned long ago that life punished people who cared too much, but she had also learned what it cost when you stopped caring at all. Noah leaned forward, peering at Willow with wide, solemn eyes. "She's shivering," he whispered. "That's the cold leaving her," Mark said gently. "Means she's still fighting." Noah nodded as if this made perfect sense. Children often understood survival more clearly than adults. Snow thickened as they left the town center. The road narrowed, flanked by dark pines heavy with white, their branches sagging like tired arms. The truck skidded once on black ice. Mark corrected smoothly. No one spoke. Ethan's mind drifted backward without permission. To another winter, another body in his arms. Ranger, his K-9 partner of 7 years. The night the call came too late, the road too slow, the blood too much. He remembered kneeling in snow just like this, whispering the same words he was whispering now. "Stay with me. Don't go. Winter hasn't finished with you." The memory tightened his chest. He looked down at Willow again. Not today. Not this time. The lights of Frosthaven Veterinary Emergency finally cut through the storm. A low building of pale brick crouched at the edge of town, windows glowing like small promises in the dark. The truck rolled into the lot, tires crunching, doors opened. Cold rushed in. A team was already waiting. Dr. Lena Hartwell, early 50s, silver-streaked hair tied back, sharp gray eyes softened by a lifetime of animals she had refused to give up on. Toby Ramirez, a young veterinary technician barely 23, all nervous energy and gentle hands, and Nurse Evelyn Pike, compact, calm, with the steady gaze of someone who had seen enough suffering to no longer be startled by it. They moved with quiet urgency as Ethan handed Willow over. The warmth of her body vanished from his arms, and the absence of it felt like something breaking loose inside him. "She's 3 months German Shepherd," Mark reported. "Abandoned, restrained outdoors, hypothermic, severely underweight." Dr. Hartwell nodded. "We've got her." She glanced at Ethan. "You coming?" Ethan didn't answer. He was already following. They carried Willow into the treatment room. Stainless steel, bright lights, the smell of antiseptic and something sharper beneath it. Fear. They laid her on a padded table. Toby slid a thermometer into place. Evelyn began clipping fur at the scruff for an IV. Ethan stood at the edge, hands useless at his sides, heart thudding too hard in his chest. He had walked into gunfire. He had pulled people from wrecked cars. He had watched men bleed out on foreign soil. None of it had prepared him for how helpless he felt standing in that room watching a puppy fight for breath. "Temps low," Toby said. "Let's warm her," Dr. Hartwell ordered. "Slow, controlled." Heating pads slid into place, warm towels, fluids. Willow whimpered once, a sound so thin it barely existed. Noah appeared in the doorway, Sarah's hand on his shoulder. "Is she okay?" he asked. Dr. Hartwell crouched to his level. "She's very sick, but she's trying, and that matters." Noah nodded, solemn as a vow. Minutes stretched, then hours. Outside, the storm thickened, snow pressing harder against the windows as if the night itself was leaning in to watch. The monitor gave a sharp, sudden chirp. Ethan's heart lurched into his throat. Dr. Hartwell's voice was calm but firm. "She's crashing. Increase the fluids. Evelyn, warmer. Toby, keep that line steady." Ethan stepped closer without realizing he'd moved. He placed one finger against Willow's tiny paw. Her skin was cool beneath the pads, the bones delicate as glass. "Stay," he whispered. "You're not done yet." The room held its breath. The monitor's tone shifted. The rhythm steadied, just slightly. Dr. Hartwell exhaled. "There, that's better." Ethan realized his own breath had been trapped in his lungs the entire time. Night deepened. Snow piled higher. The town slept. Ethan refused the coffee Toby offered. He refused to sit. He stayed by Willow's side, watching every rise and fall of her chest, every flicker of her eyelids, every small sign that she had not yet let go. At some point, Sarah and Noah returned with hot chocolate from the waiting room. Sarah pressed a cup into Ethan's hand. Their eyes met, two strangers bound by something neither had expected to carry tonight. "She's strong," Sarah said quietly. Ethan nodded. "She has to be." Near dawn, Willow stirred. Not much, just enough to let the room know she was still there. Her paw twitched. Ethan's breath broke on a sound that might have been a laugh. Dr. Hartwell checked her vitals again. "She's not stable yet," she said, "but she's hanging on." That's a start. Snowlight crept pale through the windows as morning began to bleed into the sky. Winter, for the first time all night, loosened its grip just a little. Dawn did not arrive in Silver Hollow the way it did in the cities. It crept, it hesitated. It seemed to ask permission of the mountains before touching the town at all. Pale gold light seeped through the narrow windows of Frosthaven Veterinary Emergency, barely strong enough to soften the shadows pooled in the corners of the treatment room. Ethan Cross had not slept. He sat in the same hard plastic chair he had claimed hours earlier, elbows on his knees, his hands folded together between them like he was holding something invisible that might slip away if he loosened his grip. His shoulders ached, his eyes burned, but he did not move. He watched Willow. The puppy lay on her side beneath a thin blanket, IV line taped carefully to her small foreleg, her chest rising and falling with a rhythm that was still fragile, still cautious, but undeniably there. The heating pad beneath her hummed softly, a mechanical heartbeat that joined her own. Her ears twitched now and then, reacting to sounds only she could hear. Once, her nose wrinkled as if she were dreaming of something warmer than this room, something better. Dr. Lena Hartwell entered quietly, her silver hair escaping its tie. The lines of exhaustion deepened around her eyes. She studied the monitors, the IV drip, the color of Willow's gums, the tiny rise and fall of her ribs. "She made it through the worst part of the night," Lena said softly. Ethan looked up. "But she's not out of danger." Lena shook her head. "Not yet. Dehydration this severe. Hypothermia this deep. She's still on a thin line. Puppies don't have much reserve. What they have is will." Ethan nodded. He knew something about that. Behind him, Sarah Milton stood near the doorway, wrapped in her coat, a paper cup of coffee growing cold in her hand. She had dozed in the waiting room for maybe 20 minutes at a time, always waking with a start. Noah lay curled in a chair beside her, clutching the stuffed dog a volunteer had given him, his breath slow and even at last. "Can I see her?" Sarah asked. Lena gestured her in. Sarah approached Willow's table, her movements careful, like someone stepping near a wild thing. She brushed a fingertip lightly over Willow's ear. It flicked. "She's warm now," Sarah whispered, almost afraid to believe it. "Yes," Lena said. "That's good." Time slowed again. The clinic filled with the quiet rhythms of morning, the distant bark of a dog waking in a kennel, the hum of the furnace, the shuffle of nurses changing shifts. Outside, the storm weakened, snow drifting more lazily, as if winter itself were growing tired of the fight. Around noon, Willow stirred more noticeably. Her head lifted a fraction from the blanket. Her eyes opened, cloudy, unfocused at first, then fixed on something solid and dark directly in front of her. Ethan. She stared at him for a long moment, and in that look there was no fear, only a faint question, only recognition. He leaned closer. "You stayed." Her tail gave the smallest movement, not a wag, just a whisper of one. Lena exhaled slowly. "That's a very good sign." They fed her drops of water from a syringe. Willow swallowed twice, then stopped, exhausted by the effort. Toby recorded the change. Evelyn adjusted the blanket. "Give her time," Lena said. "Today we watch. Tonight we watch. Tomorrow we'll see what she tells us." That afternoon passed like a held breath. Ethan left the room only once, when Mark returned with paperwork and the initial report. Mark stood beside him in the hallway, both men quiet. "You could have walked past," Mark said. Ethan looked at the floor. "I didn't." Mark nodded once. In Silver Hollow, that was all a man needed to say. Near sunset, Willow's condition wavered. Her breathing became shallow again, her body cooling despite the warmth beneath her. The monitor chirped, soft but sharp. Ethan stood up so fast his chair tipped backward. Lena and Evelyn moved quickly, increasing the warmth, adjusting the fluids. Toby's hands shook, but he kept the line steady. Ethan hovered at the edge of the table, his chest tight, his heart pounding with the memory of too many endings that had begun exactly this way. "Stay," he whispered. "Just stay." Minutes stretched thin. Then, a breath. Then another. The monitor's tone smoothed out. Lena straightened, her shoulders relaxing just slightly. She's fighting again. Ethan closed his eyes. The night came back down over the clinic, quiet and cold, but the storm outside had finally broken. Snow lay still on the ground, a blanket drawn over the town. Sarah and Noah returned with dinner they barely touched. Noah sat near Willow's table, talking softly to her about his school, his teacher, his snowman that was waiting at home. "She's brave," he told Ethan. "Braver than my dad was when he left." Sarah's face tightened, but she said nothing. Hours later, long after midnight, Willow shifted again. Her paws twitched beneath the blanket, slow, uncertain, like she was testing whether the world was still there. Ethan placed his hand beneath her chest, steadying her. She leaned into the touch. Morning arrived a second time. Willow's eyes opened more clearly now. Her gaze followed Ethan when he moved. Her nose brushed his fingers. A faint sound escaped her throat. Not a bark, not a whine, just a breath that carried intention. "She's recognizing you," Lena said quietly. Ethan swallowed. "I know." Late that morning, they helped Willow into a sitting position for the first time. Her body trembled. Her legs folded once. Then, with a great effort that seemed to come from someplace deeper than muscle, she straightened again and held herself upright for 3 full seconds. Noah clapped his hands to his mouth. "She's sitting!" Sarah's eyes filled. Ethan knelt in front of Willow, his hands ready but not touching. "Easy," he whispered. "You're doing great." Willow's tail flicked, this time unmistakable. Lena smiled for the first time in days. "That," she said, "is not a puppy giving up." Ethan stayed with Willow the rest of the day, watching the line between danger and hope slowly shift. Winter outside did not leave, but it no longer felt victorious. The 4th day opened with a thin blue sky stretched tight over Silver Hollow, the kind of winter morning that made the cold feel sharper because of the light. Snow lay untouched along the sidewalks and on the roofs of the low brick buildings, and the mountains beyond town stood like silent witnesses who had been waiting a very long time for someone to survive something. Inside Frosthaven Veterinary Emergency, time had settled into a careful routine. The night shift handed over to the morning crew, charts were updated, IV fluids were replaced. The heater hummed steadily beneath Willow's table, no longer an emergency measure but a quiet guard that no one yet dared to remove. Ethan Cross sat in his chair with a mug of coffee he had reheated twice and still had not finished. He had slept for less than an hour, his head dropping against the wall at some point before sunrise and lifting again the moment Willow shifted. He watched her now the way sailors watch the horizon, alert for any sign of change. Willow lay under her blanket, her black and tan coat cleaner now, the mud and grime of the bus stop washed away. Her breathing was no longer shallow, but it remained careful, as if every breath still had to be negotiated. When Ethan moved, her eyes followed him. Dr. Lena Hartwell entered with her tablet tucked under her arm, her white coat hanging open, her expression cautious but steadier than it had been for days. "She's holding her temperature without the heating pad," Lena said quietly. "That's the first real step." Ethan nodded. "So we're past the worst?" Lena shook her head. "We're past the edge of the cliff. Now we're walking a narrow path. Puppies this young, they don't crash loudly, they fade. That's what we're guarding against." As if aware of the conversation, Willow's ears twitched. She shifted slightly, then lifted her head. Her body wobbled, and Ethan rose from his chair without thinking, but Lena raised a hand. "Let her try." Willow's paws slid against the towel. She adjusted, trembled, and then held her head up on her own. Ethan felt something inside him break open. Sarah and Noah arrived mid-morning, both bundled against the cold, bringing with them a faint trace of outside life. Coffee, wind, the smell of snow and winter coats. Noah went straight to Willow's table, the stuffed dog still tucked under his arm. "She's still here," he said with relief. "Yes," Ethan replied. "She is." Noah crouched beside the table. "Hi, Willow," he whispered. "I'm Noah." Willow's nose moved. A breath escaped her throat. The afternoon unfolded slowly. Willow drank more water. She swallowed a few spoonfuls of broth. She slept. She woke. She watched Ethan. She watched the door. Near sunset, the light turned amber across the clinic floor. The snow outside glowed faintly pink. Willow stirred again, more insistently this time. Her legs drew under her body. She hesitated, then pushed. Ethan stepped forward, hands hovering, ready to catch. Willow rose, not gracefully, not steadily, but she rose. Her legs shook violently. Her body swayed. Her tail flicked once, twice. The room froze. "Willow," Ethan whispered. She stood for 3 seconds. 4, 5. Then her legs buckled and she sank back onto the blanket, exhausted, her breath coming faster now, but her eyes bright with something new. Lena let out the breath she had been holding. "That," she said, "is not survival. That is defiance." Ethan knelt beside Willow and pressed his forehead gently against the edge of the table. "Good girl." The night returned. The clinic quieted. Willow slept more deeply than she had since arriving, her breathing steady, her body warmer, her paws occasionally twitching as if chasing something she had never had before. Ethan finally stepped outside for air. Snow drifted softly around him. The town lay hushed. He stood beneath the streetlight and let the cold reach his lungs. Inside, Willow shifted. He returned to her side and stayed there until dawn. The snow returned that morning, not as a storm but as a whisper, drifting down in soft, slow threads that seemed less like weather and more like a blessing the sky had been saving for a moment it finally believed in. Silver Hollow woke cautiously, the town still wrapped in the quiet after so many long hours of holding its breath. Inside Frosthaven Veterinary Emergency, Willow opened her eyes before anyone else arrived. She lay beneath her thin blanket, her body warmer now, the sharp edge of danger no longer pressed so tightly against her ribs. Her breathing had found a steadier rhythm, not strong yet, but sure, like someone who had decided that the world was worth staying for. She moved her paw. The motion was small, almost nothing, but it carried weight. Her toes curled, then relaxed. Her ears flicked as if answering a call only she could hear. When Ethan Cross entered the room minutes later, coffee in one hand, fatigue lining his face, Willow was already watching the door. He stopped. For a moment, neither of them moved. "You're up early," he whispered. Willow's tail answered him. Not much, not strong, but real. Ethan sat beside her, lowering himself slowly to the floor, close enough that she could smell him. He set the coffee aside, then slid his hand beneath her chin. She lifted her head. It cost her something. He could see that. Her neck trembled, her shoulders shook. But she held it there, eyes locked on his, as if she had something important to say. Dr. Lena Hartwell arrived soon after, her boots dusted with snow, her hair damp from the cold. She froze when she saw Willow upright. "Well," she breathed. "Good morning, little warrior." They checked Willow's vitals again. Temperature stable, heart rate steadier, hydration improving. "She's turning a corner," Lena said. "Not out of the woods. But this is the trail." The clinic filled slowly. Nurses changed shifts. Toby brought fresh blankets. Evelyn prepared soft food, thinned with warm broth. Willow managed a few careful mouthfuls, swallowing each one with the seriousness of someone who knew the stakes. Late morning, Sarah and Noah arrived. Noah ran to Willow's table and stopped himself at the last second, remembering the rules. He clasped his hands together and leaned close instead. "She looks different," he whispered. "She is," Ethan said. "She's winning." Noah smiled, a smile that made something fragile in the room feel strong again. The hours unfolded gently, like a long song no one wanted to end. In the afternoon, Lena made the decision. "Let's try again," she said. They cleared space on the floor. They layered towels. Ethan knelt beside Willow, one hand hovering near her chest, the other near her shoulder, not touching, not forcing. Willow watched him. She leaned forward. Her paws slid beneath her. Her legs wobbled. Ethan's breath caught. "Easy," he murmured. "I'm here." Willow pushed. For a moment she trembled so hard it seemed impossible that she would remain upright. But she did. Her spine straightened. Her head lifted. Her tail gave a tiny, uncertain wag. She was standing, not leaning, not being held. Standing. Sarah gasped. Noah clamped both hands over his mouth. Toby froze in the doorway. Time stopped. Willow took one step, then another. Her body shook violently. Her legs threatened to fold, but she kept moving, drawn by something stronger than weakness. She reached Ethan's knee and pressed her nose against it. Ethan's eyes filled before he could stop them. He lowered himself fully to the floor, his forehead resting against hers. "You did it," he whispered. "You did." Willow's tail swayed again. The room broke into soft laughter, into quiet tears, into the kind of joy that only arrives after something has nearly been lost forever. Later, wrapped in a fresh blanket, Willow slept with her head resting against Ethan's boot, her breathing deep and steady. Outside, the snow continued its slow fall, no longer heavy, no longer cruel. That night, for the first time, Ethan went home. He returned before dawn. Willow lifted her head when he entered. She remembered him. Morning arrived with a different kind of light, not the pale, fragile glow that had crept into the clinic in the days before, but a steadier gold that spread across the snow like something certain, something that had finally decided it was allowed to exist. Silver Hollow shimmered beneath it, the mountains distant and calm, the world no longer holding its breath. Ethan Cross parked outside Frosthaven Veterinary Emergency just after sunrise. He had slept for 4 hours, the longest stretch since Willow's rescue, and even that had felt undeserved. The cold air cut into him as he stepped from the car, but inside his chest, something warm had begun to settle. Inside the clinic, the air smelled of clean linen and faint antiseptic and coffee. Willow was already awake. She lay on her blanket, her body stronger now, her eyes clear, her ears alert. When she saw Ethan, her tail lifted and gave a careful wag, the kind of wag that still respected how new everything was. "There you are," he said softly. Dr. Lena Hartwell joined him, her tablet in one hand, a tired but satisfied smile on her face. "Vitals are good. Hydration is stable. She's eating. I'd say the crisis window is behind us." Ethan's shoulders finally dropped. "So she's going to live?" "Yes," Lena said. "She is." They let Willow outside later that morning. The doors opened and winter greeted her. Not with cruelty this time, but with light. The snow had stopped falling. The sky stretched wide and blue. A small patch of grass peeked through where the sun had begun its quiet work. Ethan set Willow down gently. She hesitated. Her legs still trembled. Her paws sank into the cold ground. But then her nose twitched, and she took one step. Then another. Then another. The snow crunched softly beneath her. At the edge of the lot, Noah knelt in his jacket, arms open, his breath white in the air. "Willow!" he called. "Come here." She moved toward him, each step a triumph, each wobble a victory. When she reached him, Noah wrapped his arms around her carefully. Willow leaned into him, her small body pressing against his chest, her tail swaying in a slow, certain rhythm. Sarah stood behind him, her hands covering her mouth, tears bright on her cheeks. "We want her," she said to Ethan. "If the shelter allows. We want to take her home." Lena smiled. "We've already started the paperwork." Ethan knelt beside Willow, his hand resting against her warm fur. "You're home now, little one." Willow lifted her face and licked his fingers. For the first time since the bus stop, since the tape, since the cold, she barked, a small, cracked sound that carried more promise than any words. Winter, at last, had learned her name. Sometimes God does not send miracles from the sky. Sometimes he sends them through ordinary people who choose not to walk away. Willow survived not because the world was kind, but because one heart listened when God whispered, "Stop, help, stay in our daily lives." We all pass small moments where heaven is quietly watching a neighbor in pain, a stranger in need, an animal without a voice, and in those moments we decide who we are. This story reminds us that no act of love is ever wasted, and no soul is ever too small for God's attention. If you are facing something heavy today, remember this. The same God who carried Willow through the storm is walking beside you right now. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment to tell us what you believe God is teaching you today. Subscribe to this channel so more stories of light can reach the world, and may God bless every one of you watching. If you believe in miracles and the power of compassion, type Amen in the comments.